Lotte.
In what sort of environments do new enterprises typically flourish and succeed? It should be a place that helps an enterprise to grow, where an enterprise can realize its unlimited potential with talented human resources, where the success of a business is guaranteed. It is the Chungbuk Free Economic Zone.
Coming up on Arirang News. It's a major milestone in South Korea's space exploration. The third launch of the country's homegrown rocket, the Nuri, has been successful, completing its first ever proper mission. South Korea's central bank keeps its key interest rate steady at 3.5% for a third consecutive meeting and trims down the economic growth outlook for this year. But its governor leaves the door open for possible rate hikes. The South Korean team of experts wrapped up their mission to check the safety of Japan's planned Fukushima wastewater release. But the head of the team says more data should be analyzed before drawing an overall assessment. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. It's a historic moment in South Korea's space exploration. Following a 24-hour delay, the country's homegrown space rocket, the Nuri, this evening blasted off into space for its third launch. This time, Nuri was on its first ever proper mission to put real payloads, which is confirmed to be a success. For more, we go over to our Lee Kyung-eun, who's been following the developments. So Kyung-eun, what do we know about the results?
Good evening, Jiyoung from Narrow Space Center, where I can say is the main gate to space. This is where Nuri blasted off into the space at 6:24 p.m. And this time, unlike the first and second launches, it was carrying real payloads on board, 8 operating working satellites on actual mission. And putting them into orbit was what would determine the success of this launch. The key focus was on putting the main satellite, the next generation small satellite 2, into its target orbit, where it can always make use of solar energy to operate in generating an image of Earth. And as of 7:50 p.m., it has been confirmed that the launch was indeed a success.
The next generation small satellite 2 and 6 cube satellites have been confirmed to be successfully separated, but one among the 4 snipe cube satellites needs a bit more time to be confirmed.
The officials added that it may have actually separated successfully, but just may not have been captured, possibly by being in a blind spot. It is unclear when the officials will be able to find out the results, but they've made clear that they can declare a success regardless of the separation status of the cube satellites, because the ultimate goal of this launch was the successful transportation of the next set 2, and that main satellite is also confirmed to be successfully communicating with the ground.
Right, Kyung-eun, and it's a milestone achievement for the nation's space development, but there were hiccups along the way.
That's right. It was not all easy because this launch came after 24 hours of delays, as Wednesday's initial launch was called off just 3 hours to go. And it was due to a technical glitch found in the software that controls the helium valve, as it was unable to receive signals from the control tower. But this was all sorted as of 5 a.m. and Nuri was given the okay.
The Ministry of Science and ICT has decided to go ahead with the launching procedures with the aim of a 6:24 p.m. liftoff time after assessing everything that needs to be taken into consideration.
This second attempt was made in a rather swift manner compared to the second launch, which was delayed twice because it was a software issue, not hardware. So Nuri did not have to be transported back to the assembly center as the problem was fixed while Nuri remained in position. With this, now South Korea takes a step further in building more reliability and confidence in space launch vehicles and providing commercial services tailored for satellites. Back to you, Chiang.
All right, thank you, Kyung-eun. That was our Lee Kyung-eun live from the Nat'l Space Center. President Yoon Suk-yeol says the successful launch of Nuri puts South Korea among the top nations in space development. This as he congratulated those involved in the launch. On Thursday, as soon as the launch of Nuri was announced as a success, the president addressed the media via message and said that the world will now have a new perception of South Korea when it comes to space and advanced technology. He also took it to his social media to say that the launch proved that dreams come true and also acknowledged that 3 satellites delivered by the rocket were made by startup companies. He also called on the younger generations to take motivation from Nuri's launch to challenge themselves and said he'll make a country where they can work towards their dreams. South Korea's homegrown rocket, the Nuri, has finally embarked on a journey into outer space. Those who eagerly awaited the moment on site in Goheung were engineers, technicians, and the general public who traveled hundreds of miles just to be there. Our Shin Se-byuk experienced the atmosphere firsthand and files this report.
As the countdown began for Nuri, the excitement and anticipation in the Nat'l Space Center continued to build. This time, the atmosphere was filled with a renewed sense of enthusiasm after a delay the day before. People from different parts of the country came all the way down to the southernmost county of Goheung to witness history.
It was delayed by a day, but seeing it in person today brings even greater excitement.
We came here yesterday, and although the delay was disappointing, I believe that setbacks often pave the way for success. It's truly an honor to witness this moment.
An engineer involved in the development of the Nuri rocket was feeling a mix of anxiety and excitement.
This is the 3rd launch attempt for us, and it hasn't been an easy journey. We faced difficulties in the previous 2 attempts, but I've seen countless encouraging comments online from the public. Our colleagues and engineers are giving their best, even at this very moment. I remain hopeful for a successful launch.
Teams of engineers, technicians, and support staff have been meticulously preparing for this momentous event. And the moment finally comes. Families and friends, young and old, all together celebrate the groundbreaking moment.
We traveled all the way from Daejeon to witness this lift-off. It's truly amazing to experience it together with my family.
The Nuri's blast-off is a milestone in the country's growing space program. And it is also a testament to the dedication of the engineers and the enthusiasm of the people. The soaring Nuri rocket has taken people's aspirations higher, which will reach new heights with each future mission. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News, Goheung.
On the economic front, South Korea's central bank kept its key interest rate steady at 3.5% for a 3rd consecutive meeting amid economic concerns. It also trimmed down the economic growth outlook for this year. Our finance correspondent Lee Dae-yeon with all the details.
The Bank of Korea has once again frozen its key interest rate. The central bank announced the decision on Thursday after a monetary policy committee meeting. The base interest rate stays at 3.5%.
Inflation is slowing down, but it's expected to stay above the target level for a while. So we have decided to keep our tightened monetary policy. The Board of Governors voted unanimously to freeze the rate.
Now, this is the third time in a row that the BOK has decided to keep the rate unchanged. The central bank cut the base rate in 2020 amid concerns over the economic recession due to COVID-19, but started to raise the rates in August 2021. Analysts say with the consumer price index coming down to the 3% range, May's decision reflects the central bank's intention to avoid throwing cold water onto easing inflation. Economic uncertainty was also one of the factors for the rate freeze. Amid sluggish exports, South Korea's real GDP for the first quarter of this year expanded slightly, just 0.3% from the previous quarter, barely avoiding negative growth. The country's current account balance in March, too, narrowly avoided a deficit for 3 consecutive months, while the trade balance remained in the red last month for the 14th month in a row. After the monetary policy meeting, the Bank of Korea also cut this year's economic growth rate from 1.6% to 1.4%, considering the sluggish recovery of the IT and chip sector and the weak impact of China's reopening. The consumer price index is expected to be at 3.5%. With the central bank's decision to hold the rate, the interest rate difference between South Korea and the U.S. now stands at 1.75 percentage points.
The most worrying part about this hugely widened gap is an outflow of capital and the weakening of the Korean won. But the freeze shows how the government sees the current rate and the capital outflow as relatively stable for now.
Meanwhile, BOK's Governor Lee Chang-yong says there is still a chance for base rates to go up in the near future, but the market sees things a bit differently. Following the rate freeze, the market widely expects that the rate hikes to end at this point, at least for now, and rate cuts could possibly come in the second half of this year. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
The average income of South Korean households rose in the first quarter of this year. However, what's referred to as real income has not seen any change compared to the previous year, while the income gap for the upper 20% and the bottom 20% have widened. Shin Ha-young explains.
South Korean households saw their real income unchanged in the first quarter of this year because while they brought in more money, skyrocketing inflation meant it didn't go as far. According to Statistics Korea on Thursday, income for the average household rose to around 5 million Korean won, or roughly $3,800 a month. In won terms, that's an increase from a year earlier of 4.7%.
Earned income from work increased, leading to an overall rise in income. On the other hand, income from businesses dropped due to a rise in operating expenses such as labor costs, raw material prices, and cost of interest.
But taking inflation into account, real income is actually unchanged from the previous year. Income for those in the bottom 20th percentile rose by 3.2% on-year, while those in the upper 20th percentile rose by 6%, widening the gap. Meanwhile, average monthly household spending came to nearly 3.9 million won, or $2,900, up about 11% on-year. Spending on entertainment increased by 35% on-year, and restaurants and lodging rose by 21% due to the lifting of social distancing measures and the recovery of consumer sentiment. Expenditure on housing, water, and energy saw a significant increase of 11.5%. In particular, spending on fuel, including electricity and gas bills, rose by a record high of 23.5%. It implies that the cumulative increase in public utility fees is now being reflected in expenditures, putting strain on households and their budgets. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
And finally, after over 20 days of discussion and negotiation between the ruling and opposition blocs, the nation's parliament has passed a special act to help the thousands of real estate fraud victims in South Korea. Our Lee Si-hoo tells us more.
South Korea's National Assembly at its plenary session on Thursday voted to pass a special act supporting the victims of the recent spate of real estate rental fraud that swept across South Korea. The act would make way for no-interest long-term loans for a portion of the losses incurred, as well as postpone or stop the auction of affected properties and give the victims priority rights to purchase the properties. Prior to Thursday's voting, the ruling and opposition blocs engaged in multiple negotiations to come up with the agreed bill that passed 243-5 with 24 abstentions. After its implementation expected on June 1st, the special act will take temporary effect for 2 years with a possible extension. But the victims themselves, however, have criticized the bill, saying that it only adds to their current accumulated debt, calling for further relief. Meanwhile, the parliament unanimously passed a motion requiring public officials to report all virtual assets they own, regardless of the amount. The lawmakers also vowed to self-report their virtual assets.
The parliament resolves to self-report the status and histories of virtual assets to relevant agencies from the beginning of the lawmakers' term to now.
These legislations are motivated by the ongoing controversy over Representative Kim Nam-guk's alleged massive investment in cryptocurrency. Also on Thursday, the revisions to the Immigration Act and the Act on the Immigration and Legal Status of Overseas Koreans passed, with an aim to introduce mobile ID cards for non-Korean nationals and Koreans living overseas.
This will mean non-Korean citizens can carry a mobile version of their residence cards.
Lawmaker Jung, who introduced the bill, said this would make life easier for some 1.6 million long-term foreign residents in South Korea. Lee Si-hu, Arirang News.
One of the 3 surviving Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor has decided to accept the South Korean government's compensation. Seoul's foreign ministry says they'll receive payment as well as interest on Friday. This marks the first case in which a survivor has decided to accept the third-party payment. In March, the government proposed a plan to compensate a total of 15 victims or their families through a third party instead of the Japanese companies held accountable during the 2018 Supreme Court ruling. All but 5 of those eligible for compensation had accepted the solution. 3 surviving victims and the bereaved families of 2 had rejected the government's plan, saying that it lacks a sincere apology from Japan. South Korea's delegation of experts sent to inspect the Fukushima power plant has concluded its activities in Japan. The head of the team says they'll need to examine some extra data they requested from Japanese authorities before reaching a comprehensive assessment on whether the plant's wastewater is safe enough to be released into the sea. Our political correspondent Han Sung-woo has more.
After 2 days of on-site inspections, South Korea's team of 21 experts dispatched to Japan to examine the wastewater treatment facilities of the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant concluded their activities in Japan on Thursday with a technical meeting with Japanese authorities. The head of the inspection team, Yuguki, told reporters afterwards that the delegation will organize and soon explain their findings, but will have to analyze some extra data and research material they requested from Japan before reaching a comprehensive assessment. The talks included not only Japan's economy ministry and the Tokyo Electric Power Company, but this time, unlike similar talks conducted a few days ago, also Japan's Nuclear Regulation Authority, the body in charge of regulating TEPCO's plans to release the contaminated water into the sea this summer. Before heading into the meeting, Yu had told reporters that there are matters important from Korea's perspective, independent of the International Atomic Energy Agency's prior inspections, that must be thoroughly looked into. He added that things were going according to plan, but refrained from elaborating on whether their activities, until now, have produced meaningful results. Yu mentioned after Wednesday's inspections, however, that the team will likely be able to make progress in assessing the safety of the wastewater and that it examined all the facilities it had planned on seeing. Thursday's technical meeting was the last official item on the inspection team's agenda before heading home on Friday. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
Marking the 70th anniversary of the Seoul-Washington alliance, as well as the 75th anniversary of the South Korean military, South Korea and the U.S. today began the first part of their 5-day joint live-fire drills. The exercises held at Seungjin Fire Training Field in Pocheon will be the largest of their kind, involving the most up-to-date weapon system from both countries. This year's training will see the use of F-35A stealth fighter jets, AA-64 Apache attack helicopters, K-2 tanks, K-21 armored vehicles, Chunmoo multiple launch rocket launchers. Thursday's training was held in two sections. The first focused on response measures in case of missile and nuclear threats, while the second focused on counterattack operations. An official from Seoul's defense ministry says the drills are largely aimed at strengthening joint defense readiness and military capabilities in case of any military provocations from North Korea. The Wall Street Journal has reported South Korea is sending lethal aid to Ukraine via the United States. However, authorities here say it's inaccurate and any decision to do so will only be taken after a comprehensive monitoring of the situation in Ukraine. Choi Min-jung reports.
South Korea's military authorities say that a Wall Street Journal report on Seoul sending lethal aid to Ukraine is inaccurate. The report from Wednesday stated South Korea is supplying Ukraine with hundreds of thousands of artillery rounds. It explained that Seoul is transferring the shells to Washington, which will then be sent to Ukraine.
There are inaccuracies in the content of the report. As you know, the international community is providing support to keep peace and stability in Ukraine against Russia's illegal aggression. South Korea, as part of the international community, has continued to provide financial or humanitarian assistance to Ukraine.
The presidential office declined to comment on the report. The White House too, but the Pentagon reportedly acknowledged that it has held discussions with Seoul on buying its ammunition. A U.S. State Department spokesman said Washington will keep the subject of private diplomatic conversations private. The official added that the U.S. has led worldwide efforts to secure assistance from its partners and allies to support Ukraine. South Korea has been ruling out the possibility of providing lethal aid to Kyiv. On Wednesday, Seoul's National Security Advisor Cho Tae-yong said the government plans to think over whether to send lethal aid to Kyiv after monitoring the situation in Ukraine. As of now, Cho confirmed that there are no plans to send ammunition directly to Kyiv or via Poland. However, talking to Reuters last month, South Korean President Yoon hinted that Seoul might extend its aid for Ukraine beyond humanitarian and economic support when necessary. During his recent visit to the U.S., the president said that South Korea is closely monitoring the situation in Ukraine and will take proper measures to uphold international norms and law. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Overall conditions will get a touch breezier tomorrow. Maximum temperatures in Seoul will be reaching 25 degrees, which is about the seasonal average. Readings will stay in the similar range until Saturday. With increasing cloud coverage, intense UV rays will also subside. On and off showers will be widespread tomorrow due to unstable atmospheric conditions. The amount of rainfall will be fairly trivial. Starting tomorrow at dawn, the south coast will see about 5 to 20 millimeters. Parts of central regions and the surrounding areas will see less than 5 millimeters. Thunder and lightning may also accompany at times. We'll see a mix of clouds and rainy spells for the morning hours. Lows in Seoul and Gwangju will be starting off at 17 degrees. Maximum temperatures in Seoul and Chuncheon will get up to 25. Daegu and Gyeongju will be topping out at 24 degrees. A low pressure system will be dropping frequent showers until early next week. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That's all for Thursday Night Newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with the latest news tomorrow. Have a good night.
What sort of environments do new enterprises typically flourish and succeed? It should be a place that helps an enterprise to grow, where an enterprise can realize its unlimited potential with talented human resources, where the success of a business is guaranteed. It is the Chungbuk Free Economic Zone.